It's no secret that Edd, Edd and Eddy was a trio that most children shouldn't use as role models due to their countless attempts to con and scam their friends out of any money they might have. But anyone who has seen the show will tell you that they're not even close to the worst group in Peach Creek. The Kanker Sisters were a trio of bullies and love-lorn stalkers that constantly put the show in jeopardy of losing its TV-wise 7 rating. Seriously though, we need to talk about the Kanker Sisters because I don't remember Edd, Edd and Eddy being so messed up. First impressions are everything, and the Kanker Sisters did a heck of a job with theirs since they left the Edd boys fearing for their lives and possibly even their innocence. The Kanker Sisters consisted of 3 half-sisters who each had different fathers. May, Lee, and Marie all lived together in a trailer park that was adjacent to the cul-de-sac where the Edds all lived, which turned out to be perfect for them when you consider their unhealthy obsession with Edd, Edd and Eddy. On multiple occasions, the Kanker Sisters proved that they had crushes on each of the Edds, and those crushes were nowhere near innocent. In fact, these crushes often led to some deviant behavior that could have very well led any of the Edds to develop mental trauma later in life. Yeah, I've known some girls like that. But believe it or not, the trio of sisters were actually introduced in the 2nd episode of the show. Talk about setting the tone for the rest of the series. The episode was called Nagged to Ed and started out with the boys hunting for bugs to help with one of Double D's experiments. While out hunting bugs, the Edds had a run-in with the Kanker Sisters that ended up scaring them so badly that Edd, Edd and Eddy all passed out. When they finally woke up, the 3 boys found themselves in a strange trailer with 3 girls staring at them intently. Yeah, that's not creepy at all. May, Lee, and Marie all began treating the Edds rather well though, considering that they just borderline kidnapped them. They made the boys food and did their best to make them comfortable, at least for a short period of time. Eventually though, the sisters showed their true colors when they began to obsessively claim that the Edds were their boyfriends. When Edd, Edd and Eddy tried to deny that fact and rebel against the Kanker Sisters, who by that point were forcing them to help out around the house, they got angry, cried, and kicked them out. Now, if it had ended there, May, Lee, and Marie might not have seemed like such obsessive stalkers, but it didn't. Of course not. The episode ended with the girls forcing the Edds to take care of their babies, which were basically just dolls that looked like Edd, Edd and Eddy. Once they saw the dolls though, the boys decided to make a break for it and ran out of the trailer park as fast as they could. The very last scene showed the sisters all watching as the boys ran away and clearly showed how infatuated they were with the Edds. Now, don't get me wrong, at that point in the show's history, the Kanker Sisters' obsession with Edd, Edd and Eddy could have still been considered just, a nice, unhealthy crush. But you have to ask yourself, how much worse did their obsession seem as the show went on? Thinking about some of the darker moments that the Kanker Sisters had with the Edd boys, some of the stuff they did was pretty messed up. Especially when you consider the idea that the 3 Edds never really showed signs of being old enough or even interested in having girlfriends or relationships. I mean, sure, all 3 of the Edds showed their infatuation for Naz, who always seemed like a childhood crush, but they never actually showed signs of wanting any intimacy with anyone, because they were still children. That didn't really apply to the Kanker Sisters though, because throughout the series it became clear that they wanted to have physical contact with the Edds by any means necessary, even if that meant bullying them, which they did anytime they weren't trying to kiss the Edds or worse. Now, I've heard the saying tough love, but I don't think that's exactly how they meant it. For instance, in the 21st episode of Season 1, Who, What, Where, Ed, the boys were forced to interact with the Kankers so that they could get an anchor from them. They wanted the anchor so that they could trade it with Johnny, which was set off a series of trades that they set up in order to get an egg from Rolf. The Edds tried to trick the Kankers by stacking up on each other's shoulders, Little Rascal style, and disguising themselves as an anchor surveyor. However, May, Lee, and Marie quickly saw through their tricks but decided to play along, at least until Ed blew their cover. In that moment, the Kanker Sisters pounced and the boys were sent running for their lives out of the trailer park as the girls tried to kiss them. And that's not even close to the worst thing that they've done to the Ed boys. In the episode Avast Ye Eds, the boys go around giving river guide tours to the other kids in the neighborhood. And while they were out giving Johnny and Jimmy a tour that was filled with the sweet sound of Double D playing the pedal steel guitar, they happened to float by the Kanker Sisters, who were immediately interested. It wasn't long before Johnny spotted the makeshift raft that May, Lee, and Marie were using to catch up to the Edds, and as soon as they were aware, their calm river adventure turned into a treacherous race, one that ended with the Kanker Sisters forcing Johnny and Jimmy to walk the plank, which happened to actually be Johnny's friend Plank. Once everyone other than Edd and Eddy were off their raft, the sisters, dressed as pirates, seemed to claim the treasure that they were hunting for. It's not shown on screen because this was a show made for kids, but this time the boys weren't able to escape the endless kissing from their stalkers. By the time the raft got back to the starting point of the tour, they handed their float to Rolf, which was deflated in the battle, and they stumbled off with countless kiss marks on their face. And judging by their defeated and disgruntled looks, none of the kissing was consensual. The only one of the boys who had a smile on his face was Edd, and that was only because he was stuffed full of water from the river, which was spewing out of his ears onto Eddy and Double D. Now it can't possibly get worse than that, right? Well, I guess that depends on your opinion of feet, but if you ask me, yeah, it got worse. The 7th episode of Season 2 was titled Key to My Edd. The boys discovered a key and were determined to find out what house or door it opened up. However, as usual, their generally harmless plan turned into a mess for the whole cul-de-sac and caused a brawl to break out. And like a moth to a flame, the Kanker Sisters were drawn to the neighborhood brawl and took their aggression out on the rest of the kids, who began to flee as soon as they saw May, Lee, and Marie. The Edds all tried to flee like the rest of the kids, but the Kankers were in hot pursuit. They cornered Edd and Eddy at the front door of Edd's house, which happened to be locked. That was when Eddy realized that they had been carrying around Edd's key the entire time, which would have gotten them into Edd's house and away from their touchy pursuers if they had acted faster. By the time they realized they had the key to get inside Edd's house, the girls had already surrounded the Edds and quickly captured them. The scene quickly transitioned to show all 3 of the boys tied up in Edd's basement. And while that may have been a dream come true for the Kanker Sisters, it was clearly a living nightmare for Edd and Eddy, as the boys were subjected to footsies. Oh god, the horror. And as if that wasn't enough, just a few episodes later, the Kanker Sisters did something so heinous that I'm genuinely surprised that it was ever allowed on TV. In the episode Honor Thy Edd, the Edds planned on exploring an old abandoned house in their neighborhood, but their plans took a quick turn when they discovered that they were trapped inside. It wasn't long before Edd and Eddy were all separated from each other, but for some reason it seemed like the house was catering to each of their respective needs. Double D found himself in a library filled with books. Eddy had his eyes set on a piggy bank that he spotted at the top of the stairs, and Edd was on the trail of some delicious Chunky Puff cereal. Sadly for the boys though, it was all a trap that was set by 3 very specific predators. May, Lee, and Marie all lured the Edds into the house and then trapped them there while they set up an intimate ceremony that none of the boys were ready for. One by one, Edd and Eddy ended up trapped sitting in containers that were loaded onto a model train that was designed like a roller coaster with one very specific destination: their wedding. The train brought the Edds to a platform that had all 3 of the Kanker Sisters on it, and one by one they all placed makeshift rings on each of the Edds' hands. Double D got a lug nut for a ring, Eddy got a lock plate that he actually got his finger stuck in earlier in the episode, and Edd got a tab from a soda can. And if being forced to marry your stalker wasn't bad enough, the rings that all the girls gave the Edds were basically all they were wearing. That's right, Edd and Eddy were all forced into marriage while they were butt naked after being held hostage in an abandoned house filled with booby traps. And I don't think I need to tell you how messed up that is. I mean, something like that could haunt the Edds for the rest of their lives and seriously distort their perspective on love and relationships. No matter how you look at it, the Kanker Sisters were obsessive stalkers who would stop at nothing to get their precious Edds, and it would actually put Joe from You to shame. It's just too bad that they didn't just offer the boys jawbreakers. That would have saved the sisters a lot of work. But what do you think though? Were the Kanker sisters as twisted as we remember them, or were they just young girls who expressed their affection in borderline toxic ways? Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below. I am very intrigued to see what you guys have to say about this one.